Mae cyfarfod llawn a gynelir drwy gynhadledd fideo yn unol â'r rheolau sefydlog Senedd Cymru ac yn gyfystyr a thrafodion y Senedd a ddibenion deddf Llywodraeth Cymru 2006. Bydd rhai o ddarpariaethau rheol sefydlog 34 yn gymwys ar gyfer y cyfarfod yma heddi mae'r rheini wedi nodi ar eich agenda chi, a dwi eisiau atgoffa'r aelodau hefyd o'r rheolau sefydlog sy'n ymwneud â threfn yn y cyfarfod llawn a mae'r rheini wrth gwrs yn berthnasol i'r cyfarfod yma. Yr eitem gyntaf felly yw'r cwestiynau i'r Prif Weinidog, ac mae'r cwestiwn cyntaf heddi gan David Melding.
Diolch yn fawr, Llywydd. Will the First Minister make a statement on the Welsh Government's efforts to promote citizen participation in decision-making?
So the Local Government and Elections Wales Act of 2021 creates new opportunities to encourage and enable wider diversity in decision-making. The single most significant moment of citizen participation this year will come in the Senedd elections, when 16 and 17-year-olds will take part for the first time.
I thank you for that answer, First Minister. You will know the OECD now regards innovation and public policy to be really important and necessary to involve citizen participation, and indeed it's one of the key factors in their well-being index. And do you agree with me that further to this legislation, the time now has come for an action plan on citizen participation to be developed by whichever party is in the position to form the next Welsh Government?
Well, I certainly agree. I mean, with David Melding that citizen participation is not something to be thought of as a one-off event at an election, but needs to run through the whole of a term of an administration. This government has been very pleased to work closely with the OECD on a number of different policy dimensions. Most importantly, recently, alongside the work that our colleague Davies has led on regional economic policy for Wales, and citizen participation certainly is, as David Melding says, Llywydd, one of the key components of the future that the OECD set out for us. The 2001 Act, Llywydd, does place a requirement on local authorities in Wales to develop a public participation scheme, and alongside that, the Welsh Government provides support through our Digital Democracy Fund, through our Diversity in Democracy Fund, both of which are designed to promote citizens' participation. I agree with what David Melding has said, that an incoming government, whoever might make up that government, should have citizen engagement in everything we do as a running theme throughout the whole of the next Senedd term.
Elith Jewel.
Yes, so democracy only works properly if the demos or the people participate. Over the past year, because of the pandemic, more and more people are aware of devolution, but that progress is fragile. We need action now, surely, to make sure people aren't just aware of decisions being made here, but that they feel engaged. First Minister, if we look at young people, 16 and 17-year-olds have an exciting opportunity this year to vote for the first time, but political education is still not a required topic in the curriculum. In the coming years, I too would love to see more citizens' assemblies for young people to promote engagement, but this year needs action now. Pupils are drilled about Tudor governance, but the system used today to elect the government isn't always properly explained. So do you think there's an opportunity within the school day this year to ensure that all first-time voters will be able to learn about this before the election? And in the longer term, shouldn't political education be required taught?
Well, I definitely agree there's a real opportunity as we move towards the election to make sure that opportunities are taken to educate our young people in the democratic process and in the very important part that they themselves can play within it. The Welsh Government is playing its part in that alongside the Senedd Commission, alongside the Electoral Commission. We're engaged together in making sure that resources are available for young people through Hub and other means, so that those 16 and 17-year-olds who will join us at the ballot box this year have every opportunity they need to understand the responsibilities and the opportunities that are available to them. But it does go wider than that, as I'm sure Jewel will recognise. I very much enjoyed last week my conversation with students at Ysgol y Castell in Caerphilly, and there at the age of 9, 10 and 11, you have young citizens who are completely interested in the future of their country, having their voice heard in it, and the system we have of school councils and participation of young people in Welsh education, I think will stand us in very good stead as a nation, as those young people come to maturity and play their own part in our democracy.
Mark Drakeford.
We say we want to promote citizen participation in decision making, but First Minister, 6 months ago, 4 in 10 people polled didn't know health was devolved or thought it was run by Westminster, which your party exploits at UK elections. Wouldn't it be better if we simplified decision making by abolishing our unnecessary layer of government?
Sorry, I don't believe that.
Cwestiwn 2, Dai Lloyd.
Diolch yn fawr, Llywydd. Ymchwil y Prif Weinidog ddatganiad am y capacity sydd ar gael i ddarparu gwasanaethau Cymorth Iechyd Meddwl ledled Cymru.
Diolch i Dr Lloyd am y cwestiwn, Llywydd. Mae'r capacity i ddarparu gwasanaethau Cymorth Iechyd Meddwl yng Nghymru yn dibynnu'n fawr ar ddull aml asiantaeth. Yn ystod y 12 mis diwetha, mae Cymorth wedi cynyddu o fewn y gwasanaeth iechyd a hefyd drwy'r trydydd sector ac awdurdodau lleol.
Thank you for that, First Minister. Now, unprecedented is the word in terms of COVID. We've heard it many times. Unprecedented is the word in terms of mental health. Also, we have unprecedented levels of mental anguish in our people today, with unbelievable strain and long waiting lists, and with mental health staff in emergency deployments elsewhere and with their own health issues and isolating themselves. We can talk about workforce planning, but the mental health crisis is now. I have previously raised the need to use all hands on deck to tackle this huge challenge. And in addition to what you've outlined, particularly to utilise independent counsellors and therapists, CBT and others, and bring them into the NHS to increase that capacity. We have professionally trained mental health professionals who are not directly employed by the NHS today. And the Minister, Lynette Morgan, has previously stated that she is open to the idea of working with health boards on this agenda. So, unprecedented times, creative solutions for now. Do you agree?
I absolutely agree with Dr Lloyd that creative solutions will be necessary to allow us to respond to the unprecedented nature of the crisis that we face. And as he said, Lynette Morgan, as the Minister with responsibility for mental health, has indicated that the Welsh Government is open to drawing on the widest range of skilled, professional and accredited help that is available to people as we try and mobilise different forms of help for them to meet the impact on mental health and well-being of the last 12 months. That is why, in addition to the money that we have directly in this financial year, mobilised to strengthen NHS services, we've found nearly £3 million to strengthen the contribution from the third sector, particularly to Tier 1 and Tier 0 services, to make them as available to people as possible. And those people who have expertise in CBT have been part of that journey as well, particularly in providing online material where people can, in their own time and in a way that suits them, take advantage of the sorts of approaches, exercises, and ways of responding to mental health needs that we are now able to take advantage of. So I entirely agree with what Dr Lloyd said. To meet the unprecedented circumstances we're in, imagination, creativity, and a willingness to draw on all the capacity available will be part of the way that we reshape our health services for the future.
Mark Drakeford.
Well, last week, the Mental Health Foundation called for a new cross-Welsh Government strategy on preventing mental health problems, including widened access to social prescribing, such as arts projects, peer-to-peer projects, and access to nature, and action to address rural mental health. How, therefore, do you respond to several retired constituents who emailed me last week stating we're now starting to suffer health issues because of the lockdown. Mentally, we can't take much more. The lanes where we live are narrow but unrestricted, dangerous, and traffic moves very fast. They're definitely not safe to walk on. We did until now understand the reasons for not allowing bubbles at the moment, but frankly feel very desperate. People like us see no one, talk to no one, and are beginning to have health issues due to this isolation. Please appeal to the Welsh Government, putting forward the concerns of people such as ourselves, since there are a great deal of them in rural Wales. All we ask is for an extended travel rule to different local beaches or open spaces, and our bubbles so that we can talk, cry, and support.
Well, sorry, I indicated at the end of the last 3-week review that I hoped that the current 3-week review will be the last one in which we had to ask people to sustain a stay-at-home approach to dealing with the pandemic. And given that numbers are continuing to fall and that vaccination continues to be rolled out successfully in Wales, I remain hopeful that at the end of this 3-week cycle, that it will be possible to offer people in the circumstances that Mark Isherwood has described greater ability to get the exercise that they are looking for, and potentially to find more opportunities for people to meet safely outdoors. All of this, Llywydd, however, will be done primarily within the lens of the continuing public health challenges that we face from this virus. The people who have contacted Mr. Isherwood, the retired constituents to whom he referred, would not, I'm sure, wish us to do anything that would put at risk the hard-won ground that they and others in Wales have achieved by the efforts that we have made together. Those efforts are bearing fruit, and so long as they continue to do so, I hope to be in a position to respond to the sorts of messages that the member has relayed to us this afternoon.
Yw'r Davies.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, 2 weeks ago, we were pleased to host a Facebook Live event in the Bridgend and Ogmore area under the title of Mental Health, It's Good to Talk. And it was attended, I'm delighted to say, by the Minister with responsibility for mental health, but also by Megan from the Bridgend Youth Council, Mental Health Matters, local men's sheds, and many other organisations and individuals with lived experience of mental health challenges as well. Amongst the many issues raised, 2 themes were prominent. The first was the need for continuing to ramp up overall investment in mental health support and services, from the upstream investment, which you've talked about, First Minister, through to therapies and through to the acute services. And the second was the need for investment in perinatal mental health of both parents, something raised not least by Ogmore Vale campaigner Mark Williams. And I thank the Minister, by the way, for inviting Mark along to a subsequent meeting with others within days to discuss this. So, First Minister, can I ask you, what commitment can you give to continuing to boost the investment in mental health support and services across the piece, and to perinatal mental health of both parents, and also to help in remove the stigma over mental health issues, letting people know it really is good to talk about mental health?
Well, sorry, thank you, Ranka Davies, for those further questions. In terms of onward investment into mental health, he will know that the draft budget that was laid before the Senedd some weeks ago, and in the final budget that will be published later today, we will invest a further £42 million in mental health, the single largest sum of money in our health budget is devoted to mental health, and this will be a significant further investment in the next financial year in sustaining those services which, as Dr. Lloyd said, will be so necessary in the months ahead. As to perinatal services, I'm pleased to be able to confirm to members that we remain on track to invite the first patients into the new residential perinatal mental health service that is being created at Tonna Hospital, not very far from the member's own constituency. That was a commitment given by my colleague Vaughan Gethin that we would create a new inpatient facility in perinatal mental health, and that will be achieved before the elections, despite the very considerable challenges that coronavirus has posed to the builders, who are working very hard to make sure that everything can be completed at Tonna Hospital in time for those first patients to be welcomed. And finally, to congratulate the member on the event that he organised. Removing stigma in the field of mental health is a constant effort, isn't it? It's not a battle that we are going to win just by a single event or a single campaign. It remains a real challenge for us all, and I know members across the chamber have played their part in this, to make sure that we go on explaining to people that talking about mental health, being open about experiences, getting the help that can then follow from it, that is the way in which we erode the continuing stigma which unfortunately those who suffer from mental ill health continue to report to us.
Cwestiynau nawr gan Arweinwyr y Pleidiau, Arweinydd Plaid Cymru, Adam Price.
Diolch, Llywydd. Labour is like a gambler that bets everything on winning power at Westminster every 5 years. The view of Manchester's Labour Mayor Andy Burnham. First Minister, isn't that the story of Welsh politics for the last 100 years?
Well, so clearly it's not in any way a description of Welsh politics over the last 100 years. Otherwise, how would we be talking today in the institution that we have here in Wales? A powerful Senedd with independence of action, with primary law making powers. If a member's initial proposition were true, then none of that would be true.
You described independence today in the National First Minister as a 19th century response to a 21st century problem, going on to propose home rule instead, an idea from the 1880s. The problem is that home rule will never solve the fundamental problem in the Welsh democratic deficit. As the head of Labour for Indy, Wales, Bob Lloyd, said yesterday in the Daily Express, for the last 100 years, Wales has voted for a socialist party in domestic elections, yet hasn't got what it asked for. And if you don't agree with Bob Lloyd, will you at least acknowledge that Sam Pritchard, chair of the Wales Cooperative Party, to which many of your Senedd colleagues belong, has some logic to his argument that independence is the best way to achieve a more equal society, because Wales would not be bound by the voting patterns of people in southern England. We've never voted Tory in Wales, yet we've had Tory governments 2/3 of the time. Is there any reason to think that will be different in the future?
Well, what I want to see different in the future, so it is the entrenchment of the current settlement so that it cannot be rolled back unilaterally by any government at Westminster. I want a new settlement for the Union so that Wales's place in it is fully respected and the decisions that are made on a four-nation basis are made on the basis of equality of participation, where no one player can outvote or can use its authority to impose itself on others. In that way, my view and the view of my party in this Senedd will be that of the great bulk of the Welsh population. Because what the bulk of the Welsh population is in favour of is home rule, in the sense that decisions that are made in Wales about Wales are made only here in Wales, but that we do not cut ourselves off from everything that we can achieve together by a four-nation voluntary association across the UK. That is what people in Wales favour. That is what my party has always stood for.
Yesterday, your colleague Chris Bryant MP dismissed independent supporters as childish. You yourself have suggested supporters of Welsh independence are inward-looking and inherently right-wing, with recent polls showing that more than half of Labour voters are now in favour of independence, and that support is highest among our young people. On the national question, isn't it the independence movement, rather than you, First Minister, that is looking not backward, but forward to the future of our country?
I welcome anybody who wants to debate the future of our country, and all views ought to be treated properly and with respect. My view is the one I have just set out for you. And I think it is the view that most progressive people in this country share. They do not want an inward-looking nationalism. They do not want a future for our country in which we are ripped out of the United Kingdom. They want a future for our country in which Wales has a powerful set of capacities to make decisions for ourselves on the things that affect people here in Wales. But they want also to be able to work cooperatively, collaboratively, alongside progressive people in other parts of the United Kingdom, whether that is in the south of England or the north of England, or in Scotland or in Northern Ireland, where progressive people can come together to share an agenda on a voluntary basis. We achieve more together than we do apart. That is my view, and it will be the view that the Welsh Labour Party takes into this election. The member will continue to make his case to take Wales out of the United Kingdom. He's entitled to do that, absolutely. But I think he will find once again that is a minority voice here in Wales, and the bulk of the Welsh population continues to believe that the future for our country lies in powerful institutions here in Wales in a successful United Kingdom.
Arweinydd y Ceidwadwyr Cymreig, Andrew Otti Davies.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Good afternoon, First Minister. When campaigning for the Labour leadership, Keir Starmer pledged to reverse the Tory cuts in corporation tax and said there'd be no stepping back from Labour's core principles. This week, Keir Starmer said he opposes a rise in corporation tax. Which position do you support, First Minister?
So I'm not responsible for corporation tax, and I don't propose to debate views on matters for which, as First Minister, I have no accountability to the Senedd.
Well, I'm amazed by that answer, because you spend week after week debating points that you have no responsibility over, but an area you do have responsibility over is council tax, First Minister. And there's a huge amount of consequential funding that's come to the Welsh Government from the UK Government, £5.8 billion worth of support. There is a cost of living crisis developing now with this COVID crisis hitting the economy really hard. One measure you could do to help with council tax is freeze it here in Wales to help families the length and breadth of Wales. Will you commit to using the powers that you have to freeze council tax and use the consequentials to fund the funding gap?
So what I commit to is waiting until tomorrow's budget is out of the way, and we are certain about how much money we have available to us here in Wales to use next year. We will then consider the purposes for which it could be applied. I think last week the member was urging me to use that money to support businesses here in Wales. Today he wants me to freeze the council tax. I understand why he wants to do that, because the largest council tax rise in Wales last year, of course, was imposed by Conservative-controlled Conwy Council. So if he's asking me to protect council taxpayers in Wales from the Conservative Party, I'll think of that very carefully.
Well, we have Captain Hindsight in Westminster, Professor Doolittle down here in the Bay, who's not prepared to do anything with the powers that he has to help hard-pressed families across the length and breadth of Wales. One action the First Minister is proposing, though, is the imposition of NVZs. Only last week, your leader in Westminster talked about supporting farmers at the NFU annual conference for the great work that they've done right the way through the pandemic, feeding the nation. This morning, members have received a letter from Glanbia, a large milk processor, saying how damaging the regulations could be to future supplies of fresh milk here in Wales, and how they might well have to consider relocating their production facilities or realigning their operations here in Wales. Your own minister has stood on the floor of the plenary and time again, at least 7 times, said that she would not implement these regulations while the pandemic was in full flow. Ultimately, the regulators also cast a view over these regulations by saying they will have perverse outcomes. So instead of keeping the strap behind Professor Doolittle, will you now intervene, make sure these regulations aren't put in place that will have such a damaging effect on the supply of good, wholesome Welsh produce and ultimately a devastating impact on the agricultural industry here in Wales?
So I look forward to voting in favour of the regulations on the floor of the Senedd tomorrow. They will support those farmers who do not pollute our land. They will support those farmers who understand that their reputation and their future incomes depend on them being able to demonstrate that the standards of agriculture here in Wales are of the highest. They will make their contribution that is absolutely necessary to tackling climate change and the environmental crisis that we face. I'm not the person who wants to do little, or in his case, do nothing, to turn back the tide of agricultural pollution. His party will vote in favour of continued pollution here in Wales tomorrow. My party is determined that we will take the action necessary after many years of attempting to put this right by voluntary means. We will support those farmers who do the right thing already by bearing down on those who persistently and deliberately pollute our land, our water, and our environment. And the member should be ashamed of the fact that week after week he comes here to make this his top priority in asking questions of me, when he could do his part too, instead of talking the talk, to do something practical to help this nation to support those farmers who do the right thing already and make the contribution that we need to make to securing the future of this beautiful but fragile part of our planet.
Question 3, Helen Mary Jones.
Will the First Minister make a statement on the environmental impact of the rail derailment at Llangennech last year?
Thank the member for that question. So the environmental impact of the derailment was amongst the most significant in Wales since the Sea Empress disaster of 25 years ago. Monitoring of the site and surrounding area, which includes 4 sites of special scientific interest and a special area of conservation, will continue for many years to come.
I'm grateful to the First Minister for his reply, and I know that he will want to join me in congratulating the public services in the way that they've cooperated around the clean-up, which so far has been very successful given the scale of the problem that, as the First Minister rightly identifies. The First Minister will be aware that 2 groups of businesses were particularly badly affected, albeit for not very long, by the derailment. One of those was the very important cockle gathering industry. The other, of course, were farmers who graze on those low-lying banks by the river. The First Minister will be aware that there has been a request made to Welsh Government to consider whether some interim financial support might be made available to the cockle gatherers and the grazers, while responsibility for the derailment and long-term compensation becomes a possibility. I'm sure the First Minister will be aware that many of these are very small businesses. They operate on quite low margins and in difficult circumstances. So I wonder if the First Minister can tell me today whether the Welsh Government is able to look favourably on that request and when a decision might be made. I'm fully accepting that this is a very unusual set of circumstances.
So I thank Kelly Mary Jones for those further questions. I definitely do join with her in congratulating those public services who did such a remarkable job at the time so that an environmental disaster on an even greater scale was averted. I was hearing only this week from Lee Waters, the member for Llanelli, of his visit to the site on Friday of last week, where he was able to see for himself the scale of the remedial work that has been carried out. And through him and through others, of course, I am aware of the impact on cockle gatherers particularly, of the fact that they were unable to carry out their normal activities while level of environmental contaminants in the estuary were being surveyed. It is right, as Helen Mary Jones was implying, that the polluter in the end must pay for the damage that has been done. But the rail accident investigation branch work is not coming rapidly to a conclusion. And in that context, I know that my colleague Leslie Griffiths is expecting to receive advice in the next 10 days or so as to whether or not it is possible to devise a scheme through the Welsh Government in which some interim assistance to those industries could be supplied. Now, I cannot anticipate the nature of the advice that the Minister will get, but I know that she has been very keen to obtain that advice from her officials in case it is possible before the rail accident investigation is completed to offer some assistance to those who have been most directly affected.
Cwestiwn 4, Dawn Bowden.
Will the First Minister provide an update on Welsh Government support for businesses in Merthyr Tydfil and Rhymney?
So in the member's constituency, the Restrictions Business Fund has already paid grants totalling nearly £2 million to hundreds of firms. Over £500,000 has been provided through the Hospitality, Leisure and Tourism Fund. This government will go on supporting businesses in the Merthyr Tydfil and Rhymney area as we recover from the pandemic.
Thank you for that answer, First Minister. And these Welsh Government interventions clearly are critical to the chances of many businesses in my constituency, as is the absolute need for the UK Chancellor to confirm the extension of the furlough scheme as part of the UK budget announcement tomorrow. I can tell you, First Minister, that Welsh Government investment in business support, in a new bus station, in the metro improvements, in apprenticeships and the success of the Aspire apprenticeship scheme, in signing the contract for the A465 improvements, redeveloping Prince Charles Hospital and redeveloping and building new schools are all positive actions that will enable my constituency to move forward. But can I ask you to give consideration to the scope for a further stimulus package to help move us from the pandemic, which will help both to restore trade and to lift our high streets, but also to help tourism, hospitality, leisure and outdoor businesses through the next few months? And at the same time, can you assure me that the Welsh Government will be taking the responsible decisions that we all need to keep Wales safe while delivering greater fairness and putting people back to work?
So I thank Dawn Bowden for those further questions. I'm pleased to be able to tell her that the £30 million, which is the latest investment that we have provided in the hospitality, leisure and tourism sector specific fund, that the eligibility checker for that fund will open on the 3rd of March, tomorrow morning, and that the fund itself will open on the 9th of March. And I know that there will be businesses in the member's constituency who will be looking to get further help and assistance from that fund. And I'm very glad that we've been able to find that £30 million to extend the help that is available to businesses, not just in Merthyr Tydfil and Rhymney, of course, but across Wales. The budget that will be laid this afternoon, Llywydd, will show a further major sum of money set aside by the Welsh Government to go on supporting businesses in Wales next year. I agree with what the member said about the need for the UK Government to go on investing in the help that provides people to go on being employed as we come, we hope, to the end of the current wave of the crisis. We will go on using the money that we have available as a Welsh Government to provide the most generous package of support to businesses anywhere in the United Kingdom. And as the Wales Governance Centre recently confirmed through its own independence analysis, we have already well exceeded by some hundreds of millions of pounds the consequential funding that we've received from the UK Government for business support purposes.
Cwestiwn 5, Jack Sargent.
Diolch yn fawr, Llywydd. How is the Welsh Government progressing with meeting its affordable homes target?
Llywydd, I'm very pleased to confirm that we will exceed the 20,000 affordable homes target for this government term. The latest provisional release shows just under 3,000 new affordable homes were built in 2019 to 2020, the highest annual total since records began in 2008.
First Minister, following the last election in 2016, you met with my dad, you as Finance Minister and him as Housing Minister, to work out how you would meet the ambitious Welsh Labour target of 20,000 affordable homes. Now, together you put in place a delivery mechanism and the finances to ensure this happened. Your leadership and Dad's leadership delivered this programme. He dug the foundations and you laid the tiles to the roofs. We should all be very proud of this achievement. Across Wales, affordable houses have been built and residents have been given access to much needed homes. I was contacted by one of these residents who said that through my work and my support, she was able to access one of your and Dad's homes, affordable homes, at a real time of difficulty in her life. First Minister, do you agree with me that this is Welsh Labour delivering for our communities and being there for our residents when they need us most?
Well, Howard, can I thank Jack Sargent for that question? I vividly remember the meeting that he refers to. Early in this Senedd term, Carl Sargent's office and my office were next door to one another. I had newly been appointed as the Finance Minister. He was charged with implementing Labour's manifesto pledge to create 20,000 new affordable homes in a 5-year period, the largest number in the whole of devolution. And I very vividly remember Carl coming into my office and saying to me, I need a very big sum of money and I need it very quickly. And the argument he was putting to me was that in order to get to 20,000 affordable homes, he needed the bulk of the investment in the first 2 years of the Senedd term to get the programme underway, to get the houses being built, and that way we would get to the ambitious target. And it's a tribute to him particularly that I'm able to say today that that target has been met, because if it wasn't for the arguments that he mobilised and the force of the argument that led to the mobilisation of that funding, then that ambitious target would not have been met. And that is the hallmark of the Labour Party. We will go into the next election with a series of ambitious programmes here for Wales, but Llywydd, they will not just be ambitious, they will be credible as well. If we say we will do something, then we will deliver it. We said we would provide 20,000 affordable homes. We will have done that and more. And the sort of person that came to talk to Jack about the house that they now have to live in, there will be people like that in every single constituency here in Wales.
Karen Miller.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Llywydd. Can I ask you, Minister, about the work, First Minister, the work that's been undertaken by the Welsh Government to ensure that our veteran community in Wales have adequate access to housing? I know that you, like me, will recall that this week, of course, marks a special anniversary for those veterans who were involved in the Gulf War. And I know that many veterans who've suffered from PTSD in particular have really struggled sometimes to adjust to returning to civilian life. And unfortunately, some of them do end up on our streets. What specific action is the Welsh Government taking to ensure that homelessness amongst our veteran community is eradicated, please?
Yeah, well, thank you to Darren Miller for that important question. I'm very pleased to be able to report that as part of the enormous effort that has been made by our local authority colleagues, by housing associations and others in the voluntary sector, that he will know that hundreds and hundreds of people who otherwise would have been street homeless in Wales have been offered accommodation in this extraordinary year. And that has certainly included people who have left the armed forces and for whom life can be a struggle in making an adjustment to a different way of living their lives. Now, here in Wales, I think we've got a proud record of what we have been able to achieve together, and I completely acknowledge that this is an entirely cross-party agenda that we have pursued here in Wales, whether that is in mental health, whether that is in employment opportunities. And I was very glad to be able to confirm to the member recently that an idea that he first put to me about guaranteeing interviews for people who've left the armed forces for jobs in the Welsh Government, that we've been able to take that forward, and in housing as well. The Minister with particular responsibility for Veterans Affairs, Hannah Blyden, of course, is the Deputy Minister in the department that has direct responsibility for housing, and making sure that people who have left the armed forces don't find themselves falling into homelessness, but have other and far better housing opportunities for them. That is certainly part of the agenda, the broader veterans agenda that we have in Wales.
Andy Jones.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, it's good that your government is surpassing its own target of 20,000 affordable homes during this Senedd term. Though recent headlines suggest that private developers see Wales as not being a particularly attractive prospect and cite many reasons, including the planning system and Welsh regulations being the most onerous in the UK. We know that the 20,000 target goes nowhere near meeting the actual demand. So what is your plan to encourage a range of providers to build here in Wales? Thank you.
Well, Llywyd, I'm proud of the standards that we have here in Wales. It is absolutely essential that when new houses are built, they are houses that are fit for the future, that they are houses which will make their contribution to the net carbon zero targets that we have agreed for 2050. And I know that there are some house builders who find it challenging to meet the standards that are required, but they are absolutely necessary. And the fact that 8,000 of our 20,000 affordable homes were reached through the Help to Buy scheme demonstrates to me that there are house builders in Wales who are capable of delivering quality housing within the standards that we require here. We will go on having standards for house building in Wales that do not leave us with a huge legacy of retrofitting those housing to make those houses to make them fit for the sort of carbon neutral future that we need to have. And I'm very pleased that we have standards that will stand up to examination by future generations, as our Wellbeing of Future Generations Act requires of us.
Cwestiwn 6, Hefin David.
Will the First Minister provide an update on the delivery of the COVID-19 vaccine in Caerphilly to JCVI Priority Group 6?
Llywyd, we're on track to deliver against our next target of mid-April for groups 5 to 9, subject of course to supply. On Friday evening, the number of vaccinations administered by our NHS exceeded the 1 million mark, or 21 GP practices in the Caerphilly area have signed up and are delivering the vaccine.
With regard to unpaid carers, I've been approached by some in receipt of carers allowance who are concerned that they don't meet all of the 3 criteria for eligibility for vaccine at Priority 6 that was released by the Welsh Government last Wednesday. Can the First Minister therefore provide an assurance that if you are in receipt of carers allowance, you will be called at Priority 6?
Thank Hefin David Llywyd for that. We set out the guidance, as the member said, on the 24th of February. And our guidance, as I explained last week on the floor of the Senedd, in relation to people with learning difficulties who are also encompassed within Priority Group 6, our guidance is designed to take a more progressive view of the number of unpaid carers who can be identified as eligible for vaccination here in Wales. We didn't confine ourselves to carers allowance because we thought that was too restrictive. I would be very surprised if there are people who are able to claim carers allowance who cannot bring themselves within the system that we have now agreed here in Wales. I'm very grateful to the carers organisations, Carers Wales, for example, who cooperated with us to draw up the online form that we will use so that people who are unpaid carers can demonstrate their eligibility for inclusion within priority group 6. Of course, if there are individual examples where people are not being identified through the route that we have set out, then we'll be very keen to hear of that so we can put that right. But our aim is to have, as I say, an inclusive approach to priority group 6, including unpaid carers. We have to have criteria, so we can't just have a self-certification system, but the system we have devised has been drawn up in agreement with carers organisations themselves.
Cwestiwn 7, Bethan Syed.
What are the First Minister's priorities for improving research-based education in Wales?
Thank the member for that question. So the Welsh Government's priorities include direct investment in high-quality education research to ensure that policymakers get the best advice, teachers have the best evidence to guide their practice, and pupils and students have the best possible learning experience.
Thank you for that reply. Clearly, the Reid Review recommended that due to Wales's historic underinvestment in research and lack of private research economic base, the Welsh Government should lead on this by increasing funding via the Future of Wales Fund, with a more significant fund, at least about £30 million. But last year, your Welsh Government only put £7 million into this particular fund. Now, last year, your government also cut forecast funding growth to HEFCW for Welsh universities to cover more expensive premium courses, many of which are in the STEM and medicine area. And Wales also spends less gross on research and development than other UK countries, sadly, and this has to change, in my opinion. Can you outline for us here today what you plan to do to rectify this underinvestment in research, particularly through universities and colleges, to make sure that Wales can be on a level playing field with the rest of the UK and the rest of the world?
Well, Charlotte, I don't think the member gives a rounded account of the success of the Welsh research sector. The success it has had in drawing down funding from Horizon 2020 entirely beyond what you would expect of a research community of the size we have here in Wales. And through European funds more generally, we have invested hundreds of millions of pounds in research capacity here in Wales. And part of that in recent years has been improving the capacity of the sector to draw down funding from UK research councils. And we have research examples here in Wales where the drawdown from the research councils on a UK basis has been increasing in Wales. But as well as drawing down more funding, it is the impact of the research that we can be particularly proud of, because Welsh research is highly impactful. In the research citation indices that universities use, Welsh research has an impact 75% above the global average and 12% above the UK average. And Wales's share of the top 5% of the most highly cited publications is twice the global average. Now, these figures were very persuasively set out by our Chief Scientific Advisor, Professor Peter Hallinan, when he and I were involved in opening a new research institute at Swansea University last Friday. An institute I know the member will be interested in, the successor to the Morgan Academy. And the sense of ambition there at the university to draw further funding, to continue to provide impactful research, says to me that the sector continues to be in robust health here in Wales.
Ac yn ôl cwestiwn 8, Caroline Jones.
Diolch, Llywydd. What plans does the Welsh Government have to improve cancer diagnostics in light of the coronavirus pandemic?
So I thank the member for that question. Further investment in diagnostic equipment and growth in the diagnostic workforce are amongst the actions being taken to create new capacity in cancer services as we emerge from the pandemic.
Thank you, First Minister. The tragic consequence of the measures to control the spread of COVID-19 has been the dramatic fall in the numbers of people with symptoms of cancer seeking treatment. The study conducted by Cancer Research UK found that almost half of people with potential cancer symptoms did not contact their GP during the first wave of the pandemic, apart from reinforcing the message that the NHS is open for business. What more can your government do to ensure that we reduce the backlog in diagnostics and improve the chances of survival for those now seeking treatment? Diolch.
I thank the member for that very important question, and it gives me an opportunity to echo what she just said, that cancer services have been open in Wales from the very start of the pandemic. We really encourage people to come forward if they have signs or symptoms. The system is there, the system is open, the system is ready to offer you the sort of help that is needed. Now, I understand, of course, that during the pandemic, people have been wanting to protect the NHS themselves, anxious about coming forward when they knew the coronavirus was in widespread circulation. But from the very start of the pandemic, in April of last year, instructions were issued to the health service to prioritise cancer care, and those services have worked very hard indeed to make sure that they have continued to be available. We restored cancer screening programmes during the summer of last year, and those screening programmes have remained open throughout this second wave. The clear message, it's the one that Caroline Jones herself just mentioned, and I want to amplify it this afternoon. If you feel at all that you have signs or symptoms that ought to be attended to, please make an appointment to speak with your GP, because the cancer system in Wales is here and waiting to offer you the help you need.
Diolch i'r Prif Weinidog. Yr eitem nesaf felly yw'r datganiad busnes gan y trefnydd, a dwi'n galw'r